Hello and welcome to another episode of Code with Gigi. In this episode, I'll teach you how to create a swipeable image carousel in React Native. We will be able to scroll through the images either by swiping left and right, by clicking on an extra previous button, or by clicking on a number to scroll to a specific image. I really had a lot of fun building this. I hope you guys find it useful. And if you do, please click the subscribe button. Let's get started. And as usual, we will start by creating a new React Native project with the command npx react native init in the name of your project. Make sure you're running this in terminal. And once that's created, we're going to install our packages. Just run cd into the project directory, and then we'll run npm i. Once that's done, let's run our app in iOS. And to do that, we're going to type npx react native run iOS. Here I'm specifying which simulator I want to run it in. You guys don't have to, it's optional. Okay, now that our app is running, let's go ahead and open our project in VS Code. All right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new file in place of app.tsx. So I'm going to delete app.tsx default file. I'm going to create a new file called app.js. And I'm just going to add some very minimal code here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import React from React. And I'm going to add a component from React Native called safe area view. And then I'm just going to return the safe area view with some text just as a placeholder for now. And then I'm going to export default the app, and that's it. That's our minimal code for app.js. All right, now we're going to start building our components. So in my project root, I'm going to create a folder called source, src, and then I'll create another folder in there called components. And then I'm going to create a new file called carousel.js. And this is where the bulk of our code's going to be. First things first, let's go ahead and import React from React in our carousel file. And then I'm going to import a few components from React Native. I'm importing the view, a Flatlist, dimensions. That's all I'm going to do for now. We'll come back and add a few more later. I'm just returning a Flatlist that will display some data that's going to be passed into this component from wherever we import this carousel from. I'm going to go ahead and use this dimensions here to set the width of our carousel to the width of the device's window. And to do that, I'm using the dimensions.get method window.width. All right, so in my flat list, I'm just going to add some basic things here. I'm adding the key extractor, and I'm going to use the item.id, and we'll see in a minute what the structure of our data looks like. And I'm also going to add the render item property, and this is where we're going to render our carousel items. So I'm just going to return a view and a text, and I'm just displaying the title of the image. I'm going to go ahead and add style to the view and set that width to the screen width, and that's it. Let's go into app.js and import our carousel component. And instead of displaying the text, I'm going to go ahead and display the carousel. And I'm passing some data property to my carousel, a list of images with titles and ID. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this over for now. So this is the structure of our data. We have an ID, a URI for the path to the image from Unsplash, just for this demonstration. So three things: the ID, the URI, and the title is all we need. And this is all we need to do in app.js. The rest of the code will be in our carousel. So back to carousel, we've got a text item. Let's go ahead and add the image component so we can display our image. All right, looks like I've got an error here. Let's see what this error is. All right, I see what the problem is. I spelled Flatlist wrong. That should be a uppercase L instead of a lowercase. And then I'm not importing the text. So let's go ahead and import the text component as well. And that should take care of that error that I'm getting. There we go. Now we're displaying only the title of our data from the images. So let's go ahead and start adding more code to this. I'm going to go ahead and add the image component. Since this is a network file, I'm going to use source with the URI properties set to our item.uri. Then I'm going to add a style in my style sheets for this image. Let's go ahead and fix this here. Should be double braces. All right, so we've got the image source. We need to define a style for this image. And I'm going to add a couple of things here. I'm just going to justify this view component to the center and align items to the center. I'm going to go ahead and add style also to the image text, and I'll just call this one image text. Let's go ahead and make a check here to make sure that our item does have a URI and it also has an image. If it does not, let's just return an empty component with a 0 width. Otherwise, we'll return our image component. All right, so I'm going to define my styles variable here, and that's going to be set to stylesheet.create. Let me go ahead and import that style sheet from React Native. All right, so I want to define an image and also an image text. So I'm just going to set a width for my image to 95% of the parent component, which was the screen width. And I'm going to set the height to a screen width, and I'll just -10 to add some margin around and then I'm going to set the resize mode here to cover. You can set it to whatever you like. I'm also going to add a border radius just to make it look a little bit nicer. All right, and then for the image text, I'm just going to position this so it's at the top of the image. So I'm going to set the position absolute, and I'm going to set the top to 10, and then the right, I'm going to set that also to about 15. And then I'm going to set the color of that text to white, just to add a little bit of aesthetics to this. All right, so we're not displaying an image. Let's see what's going on here. All right, I see it looks like I misspelled width here, so let's go ahead and fix that. All right, so there we go. Now we've got our images being displayed, but they're being displayed vertically in a vertical scrolling list. So first thing we want to do is set our horizontal to true here, or set horizontal. It does default to true. And then I also want to set show horizontal indicator to false here. All right, so now I can scroll horizontally, but as you can see, as I scroll, I can stop anywhere in the scroll. The next thing I want to do is I want to scroll, and I want each image to snap to the view area so that you can't stop halfway between the images. To do that, we've got a couple of properties we want to set. One is snap to interval, and that's going to be set to the screen width. The next one we're going to set is going to be snap to alignment, and we're going to set snap to alignment to center. Now, as you can see, as I scroll, it slowly goes to wherever I stop. Depending on where I stop, it'll snap either the before or after. But as you can see, it's really slow. So we've got another property called deceleration rate. This is basically how fast that image will decelerate when user removes their finger from the device. All right, so now we can go scroll through and snap our image to the grid, and it'll decelerate fast. I'm also going to set the paging enable to true, since we're going to do some pagination on this component. All right, so the next property we're going to set is the on scroll property, which has a parameter that will give us access to the methods of this flat list. So one of the things I can get from this data is the offset of the item. So whenever you scroll, we can see what the offset value is on the x-axis by calling data native event content offset.x. That'll basically return that position. So like we've set our width to the screen width, it'll be whatever the width of the screen is. So in my case, it might be 390. In another device, it might be something else. So let's go ahead and console log our offset here, just so you can see what this looks like as we scroll through the images. I'm going to go ahead and divide my offset by the screen width so I can get a number that I can use as an index for each image in our array. So as you can see, as I scroll, we see that console log statement, and there's quite a few of them. And the offset I'm getting is some number with a decimal, and then finally I get a non-decimal number. So one of the things we want to do is reduce the number of times this event is executed. So to reduce that number of times this on-scroll event is executed, we are going to set another property here, scroll event throttle, and the lower we set that, the less that's executed. So you can set it anywhere from 1 to 16. I'm going to go ahead and set mine to 0. And let's scroll again and see. So now you can see it's only being executed twice when I scroll per item in my scroll. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the buttons to navigate to the next image and one to navigate to the previous. So to do that, I'm adding a view component after the flat list. And I'm going to set some styling here in a minute, but it'll contain 2 pressable components, one for the previous and one for the next buttons or the arrows. So I'm just going to add some text arrows here, nothing big, no big deal here. And then I'm going to add some just basic styling to that footer. I'm going to set the direction of the flex to row, justify the content with space between. And I'm going to set the width to 90% because I think that's what we set the image to. So we can see the arrows, but they're not quite styled. So I'm going to here in the parent view, I'm just going to justify and align everything in the carousel to the center. And I'm going to add a style to the text component of the button. I'm just going to call that button text. Clean this up a little. And then I'm going to set the font size here to, let's set it to 30. All right, looks like I have an error, a syntax error somewhere. Let me see, what did I do? Not here. Oh, I see, there we go, remove that. And there we go. Now we have the previous and next buttons. Next, I need to add the on press handlers for those. To do that, I'm gonna set a ref property on the flat list. I'm gonna call it Flatlist ref, and I'm gonna import the couple of things, hooks here. I'm gonna import the use state hook and the use ref hook, and I'm gonna set the Flatlist ref to use ref, and I'm gonna set that to null, and that'll detect whenever we scroll through our list to see where our current offset on that item is. So I'm creating a function called onPrevious. This is going to be the on press handler to when we click on the previous arrow. So first I'm going to check if the ref current is set. If it is, then I can call a method called scroll to index on this, and I'm going to set the index to a value of the current position plus 1. So we'll set that in a minute. Let's set a couple of state variables here. I'm going to set slide, set slide. This way I can keep track of the position of, I'm just calling it a slide, or keep track of the position of the image within this container. So now I can set the index to the current slide minus 1 when I click on the previous. And let's also do a sanity check here and see if the slide is equal to 1, we'll just return. We don't want to go out of range of our data set either. So I'm going to go in the on scroll. Because this is triggered every time we scroll, I can detect the offset. And with that offset, I'm dividing it by the screen width, which is going to set it to the index of that item in our data set. I'm going to check to see if it's a decimal because I don't want to set my slide to some non-whole number. So I'm just checking to see if this is a decimal. If it's not a decimal, then I'll go ahead and set my slide to the value of the offset. I'm just going to go ahead and here, I'm going to display the slides. So when we press those buttons, we can see the slide number. All right, so let's go ahead and add the on press to our previous button, and then I'm going to go ahead and just copy this and paste it and just change the name to on next. And this one I'm going to check to see if the slide is equal to the length of our data, then we'll just return it. Otherwise, as long as we have a current value on our ref, then we can go ahead and increment our slide by 1 to move to the next slide. All right, so let's go ahead and set the slide correctly here. If it's not a decimal, I'm going to go ahead and set my slide to the current offset plus 1. So as we're moving or scrolling, it gets the offset of the current of that previous slide. So we're just going to do some logic here to set our offset to that current slide. So we need to increment our offset by 1 because our initial offset would be 0 instead of 1. So we need to add 1 to make sure we have the right slide number here. All right, so now that we've set our new slide, I've got an error on previous should be slide minus 1. And I'm going to create 2 more state variables so that we can set those previous and next button to disabled when we reach the beginning and when we reach the end of that list. So I'm just going to call that one of them previous disabled and the next to next disabled. And here on the on scroll, I'm going to go ahead and set those. So previous will be disabled when the new slide is equal to 1. And the next should be disabled when the new slide is equal to the length of our data. And I think that should work. Actually, no, my previous is not disabled. May need to set this to 0 because we do start with a 0 offset. Let me refresh. Nope. What am I doing? Let's default the previous. Let me go ahead and set that here. Okay, I need to set the disabled on my pressable and on the on next also. Okay. And what else do I need to do? I can set this back to 1. All right, so that's still not being set correctly. Something's not quite right here. Let's see, that should be disabled. So, okay, I see. I need to set maybe an opacity on that button when this button is disabled. Actually, I'm not going to set it on the text. I can probably, let's set this on our pressable. So I'm going to set the style here, detect when the button is pressed. And then I'll go ahead and add a opacity when the pressed, and or when the next is disabled, we're going to go ahead and set the opacity to 5. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and set that to 1. Let's go ahead and also check or set this on our previous button. Make sure that says previous disabled. All right, so we've detected if it's pressed. Now there we go, that's working. I'm going to go ahead and scroll fast through this list. All right, so I'm still going out of range when I reach the end of my list. So let's see what the problem is. We need to fix this. Maybe I need to check data. No. All right, I see. You see here, I'm checking data.length, but I've called these props data as well. So we need to change that to props. So we're not checking props.length. And that's data.length. That looks okay. And we're going to check if it's data.length minus 1. All right, so initially I'm going to set my 1 to disabled. That works. I'm going to go ahead and scroll through this list, and it looks like it's working. Fantastic. All right, so now that we've got the previous and next buttons working, I'm going to go ahead and add the slide numbers, or we want to call them page numbers, whatever you want to call them. I'm going to add that in between the previous and next buttons. So first I'm going to set a max slides variable so that I can set the max number of pages I want to display at a time. So we're only going to be displaying the max number of slides at a time. I'm going to write some logic here to determine what gets displayed for the slide number. So I'm going to initially set the slide number to, I'm just mapping through an array of length of max slides. There's nothing really in this array. I'm just detecting the keys. It's just a placeholders so I can iterate and display the slide number. So the slide number, I'm going to set it to I plus 1. If it's greater than the max slides, then I'm going to reset that slide number so that it's times the number of max slides, if that makes sense. So I'm dividing the slide, the current slide, by the max slides, and then I'm using math.floor to drop that decimal point. So if that was 1, it would be 1 times max slides. If it's 2, it'll be 2 times. That way when we reach the end of our list, the correct slide number will be displayed. All right, and then if the slide number is less than the length of our data, then I'm going to go ahead and display a pressable, and I'm going to display the slide number. And then what else do we want to do? Let's go ahead and add some styling on our slide number so we can visually see which slide number we're on. So if the current slide equals the slide number, we'll set the font weight to something more bold, and then I'll set the font size a little bit bigger as well. All right, last thing we have left is to add our on press handler when we click on the slide number. So we're gonna use the same way we did on next and on previous. We're gonna use the Flatlist ref. We're gonna use the Flatlist ref, and we're gonna scroll to index. And in this case, we're gonna scroll to that slide number that we click on. And that should actually be it, except we have an error. Okay, I see iterable. I need keys is a function. All right, there we go. So we've got our page numbers. We've got a couple of cleanups. Let's remove the slide number. And now I can click on the slide number and it'll scroll to that position. How cool is that? I think this looks great, except one last cleanup, and that is to align that footer so that it's centered with the two buttons. And here we go. We can click on the page number. We can go to any page or slide. We can still slide and swipe. And as we swipe, you notice the slide number. You can visually see which slide number you're on. All right, well, I hope you guys found this useful. I had a lot of fun creating this. Like always, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to my channel. And I will see you guys in the next episode.